It is August 1st, 2021. I'm Andy, and this is the Minorcan Mullet Report from St.simons Island today. Some of you may have seen the short videos we put up yesterday evening about the oil that has impacted the beaches on St.simons Island. This is what we saw last night. Really heavy streak of concentrated heavy fuel oil on the sand, and this was about dark last night. Things were starting to the sun was headed down. Along with the heavier concentration, there were these just strings of the heavy fuel oil on the sand. We saw some video that was sent to us from people, and of course this is on the incoming tide here. We can see that oil against the rocks here. These rocks that are on St.simons they're called the Johnson Rocks, and after, I believe it was Hurricane Dora back in 1964, President Johnson at the time came to the area after it was hit by the storm, and part of the federal government's assistance was the placement of these rocks along the shore to steady up the shoreline. St.simons took a pretty good brunt of that storm at that time and actually lost a street in this area. Beachview Drive was kind of washed away in the houses that were on it. So this is kind of in that area, but it was pretty heavy, and folks were out walking along in the evening, taking their beach strolls as they usually would, and they're working to avoid it as best they can, but it was very difficult to do because it was so widespread on the sand. And this, of course, is looking out into the water. We can actually see that smooth looking water out there are contaminants that were still and are still coming off of the site from where Section 6 was cut and lifted. But this morning we got out there, and the group that's out there, J&S, they had their personnel on site this morning. They worked the decontamination part of the project. This was just after daylight this morning. They were out and working the beaches. The heavier oil that was out there last night when the tide came in was washed away. So the only thing now we still have a streak, but it's not as heavy as it was last night, what we saw. So it apparently was washed away to where, who knows. It may come back on the evening high tide. All that we'll have to wait and see. But these guys were out there, and I mean they're sweeping, they're brooming the sand. And along with scraping it, and what they were doing was they were combining all this stuff into piles and then coming back and putting it into bags and placing it on the cart. So they were very mobile, very efficient at what they were doing, and they were working these areas as quickly as they could to try to get this material picked up before it has an opportunity to get washed away or washed somewhere else with the next tide. Now, understand they're making pretty good progress. Their work is limited by the tide. Once the tide comes in, they have to pull off because all this is underwater with these tides that we have here in coastal Georgia. But early this morning, they were out, and we could see a couple different groups. These guys were starting here, and down the beach, way down the beach, we could see another group that was starting. We understand that the area that was affected, for those of you who are familiar with St.simons Island, was from just west of the lighthouse on around to about the King and Prince Beach Resort on St.simons. So a pretty widespread area that was affected by the release from Section 7 of the Golden Ray, or excuse me, Section 6 of the Golden Ray. This morning here, just kind of taking a stroll down the beach so you guys can kind of understand just how widespread this stuff is. The dark spots you're seeing in the sand, this is all oil, tar balls, whatever it is you want to describe it as. It's oil, and you can kind of get an idea just how scattered and really covered the beach sand here on St. Simons. And it made it up. You can kind of tell where the high tide kind of washed it. The thing about the tide here, once you kind of get around the corner here, the tide is actually all the time, when it gets high, in the rocks, in these Johnson rocks, back around towards the lighthouse and the St. Simons Pier. And what we're going to see as we start to get closer to the rocks is how it impacted those rocks. And it's not just, it's worked its way on back into behind these big boulders and little nooks and crannies, to a point where it looks like it's going to be a pretty tough task to get it washed out. What we understand, may be implementing some power washers in here to help remove this product and this mass amount of oil that got onto these rocks off. It was pretty thick in this area, and really concentrated into the St. Simons Lighthouse area, where you could see, even on the crossover, the wooden crossovers over these rocks onto the beach, you could see where the oil had kind of splashed up on those crossovers and just making a mess. And even kind of walking through it, the stuff would stick to your feet, stick to your shoes. You wouldn't want to get in your car without trying to get this stuff off your feet. And that's, of course, presents another problem. You created another hazardous material site in your car or whatever. And we just kind of just show you how sticky this stuff is. It's just really thick material. Now, shot here from the boat, this is the area where we were looking from, and you can kind of see how those rocks kind of outcrop from the shoreline. And here, as the tides begins to come in, you can actually kind of picture how high that tide is and how high that oil impacted the area. Now, also, it's not just contained to the area of the pier. This is actually the area right behind the towers. If you guys have been watching the series, know that we've kind of been following the removal of the navigational towers in the St. Simons Sound, not far from the wreck. And we can see that this area got oiled pretty heavy as well. You're right over the oyster beds and into the grass. The guys know about this, and I'm sure that they will be working the area as quickly as they can to get in and try to. Typically, what they've been doing is putting sphagnum moss out on here to help absorb the oil material, and as it does that, it's supposed to help spread it and help it to break down. We'll be watching and see how this area is impacted. I don't know how the oil will affect this area of grass, but I would think that this stuff is probably going to have a hard time surviving once it's been coated like that. We'll see. This will be an area that we can keep our eye on and see if it browns out, and see if there's any other residual effects from the amount of oil that this area took. Well, the show today, I guess, has kind of been more on the impacts to the area from the cutting. We'll have another episode of the actual site today. We'd like to thank you guys that are maybe just seeing this for the first time. Hit that subscribe link, hit that thumbs up, Send us some comments. And most of all, we want you guys to stay safe out there.